Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Supporting Students' Mental Health as they Head Back to School, Student and Staff's Mental Health, led by UAMS professor and RBEST co-director and director of the TRIS program, Dr. Nikki Edge, along with Emily Robbins, who is the social work program manager for trauma care for RBEST and works extensively with the TRIS program. My name is Anna Kate Bogards, and I'll be your webinar moderator for today. Before we get started, I wanted to let you know a little bit about, a little bit about the RBEST and TRIS programs and do some housekeeping announcements. Arkansas Building Effective Services for Trauma, or RBEST, is a state-funded program at the UAMS Psychiatric Research Institute, and our aim is to improve mental health services for children and families who have experienced trauma. We work closely with multiple partners to build a more trauma-informed state, and we're probably best known for providing training to mental health professionals on treatments that are effective with helping children and families recover from trauma. We've just completed our first year of our new program called the Arkansas Trauma Resource Initiative for Schools, or TRIS, through which we provide training, consultation, and other support to schools to better respond to trauma. Some of you joining today from the education world may have already received training from us, and we're just so excited to be able to partner with you and to partner with your schools and communities. A little bit of housekeeping before we get started. We encourage you to ask questions, and to do that, you can type it into the little question box that you should have on your screen. And then we'll get to those questions as time allows at the end of the presentation. But feel free to type them in throughout. Also, a note about audio and video. We do have one video that we're showing. And for some reason, when we play videos through this system, sometimes people who are joining by phone are unable to hear the audio for the video. If that's the case, don't worry. I will be sharing a link to the video afterwards by email, so don't worry about that. And yeah, just for everyone, we'll make sure that you're able to see it if you have a problem hearing it. So, if you're interested in earning a CEU, just make sure to stick around to the very end, and I'll give some instructions on how you can obtain that. We are recording this webinar, which we'll upload to the RBEST YouTube channel, so you'll be able to watch this and other webinars there if you'd like. And also, don't forget to check us out on the RBEST and TRIS Facebook pages, and we'll share a link at the end to the TRIS Facebook and other ways to reach us so that you can hear more about other training and webinar opportunities in the future. All right, well, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Nikki.
Great, thanks, Anna Kate. As Anna Kate mentioned, I'm Nikki Edge, and I have the privilege of being a part of the TRIS team, and I want to tell you a little bit more about the TRIS since we're still new and many of you may not have heard of us. Our purpose is to provide training, resources, and support to schools so that they can more effectively respond to the impact of trauma on students and staff. And to do that, we have collaborators across UAMS who are, bringing together all of our trauma expertise and partnering with the Department of Education and others in the educational community so that together we can have a more effective response to childhood trauma. We want to thank our funders, the Arkansas's Blue and You Foundation, who have funded the launch of the TRIS with a generous 3-year grant. As you can see kind of on the screen, this is our TRIS goal. We want to really increase the likelihood that students with experiences of trauma will be able to succeed in school. And so to do that, we help schools prepare for, respond to, and recover from traumatic events that affect members of their school community. And here's kind of what Emily and I will be talking about today. As you all are, I'm sure, very aware, this has been a long, hard summer of difficult events in many communities. And we want to talk about how students can be impacted by some of the tragedies we've had this past summer, as well as things that may be going on in their own lives, and talk about strategies that will help students be able to kind of get back into learning mode. And then Emily's going to pick up and talk about signs and symptoms when kids might need more support and what kind of supports are available. And we'll talk through some mental health resources that are available to schools and to families. We hope we have both parents and school personnel on this webinar, and we'll be describing strategies that are appropriate both for parents, other caring adults in kids' lives, and teachers to use to support them as they're heading back to school this year. So let's talk for just a couple moments about a little bit of background about this issue of childhood trauma and how it can impact children. Many of you probably have heard the term adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. This is kind of a term that's been used more in the last several years to describe potentially traumatic events that can occur in childhood. You can see the examples kind of on your screen. This covers, all kinds of abuse and neglect, but also losses like the death of a parent or challenging events like witnessing violence. And of course, this isn't an exhaustive list of the kinds of traumatic events that kids can experience. It doesn't, have on this particular slide natural disasters or car wrecks or medical trauma, all kinds of difficult things that kids can experience. But what we like about this slide is it reminds us that there are things that kids experience individually and in their families, but then there's things that we're experiencing collectively in our communities, some communities impacted more than others. And we've had some reminders in the news just this week here in our own state, certainly here in Little Rock, that we are impacted not just by things that are impacting us as individuals, but that there are things going on in our communities that can be very challenging. Here in Little Rock this week, we had a very serious string of violent events, including shootings, and it's just a powerful reminder that we are impacted by what happens in our broader communities. And we know that research tells us that we don't have to be necessarily the one who experienced a traumatic event to be impacted. We know that having someone we love and care about experience a trauma can impact us. We know basically that the research says we don't have to be the ones with the bruises to be impacted by traumatic events. Unfortunately, too many children are directly impacted by traumatic experiences, including experiences that are difficult in their own homes. We know that we have one of the highest rates in the nation of children exposed to multiple traumatic events. You can see the statistic on your screen. We're first or second in the nation in this statistic, depending on the year. We know that the statistics tell us that overall about 1 in 7 children will experience abuse or neglect in any given year. 1 in 4 children will experience it in their lifetime. And so when we think about, kids heading back to school in a classroom full of students, we know that the odds are that there'll be multiple children in any classroom in Arkansas that has been experiencing difficult events. And then again, bringing it back to our communities and the challenges that we've been facing for many years, but really highlighted this summer, places that should feel safe and yet have not been. Events that have made us question our safety in places we never needed to question our safety before. So we think about that supermarket in Chicago in May, where multiple people were killed. We think about, of course, Uvalde, Texas, and the tragedy at the school there that's been so on our minds this summer. We think about July 4th, Independence Day parade, and tragedy even in a medical facility in a neighboring state. And, I think it's important to remember that our kids, most of them, have not been back to school since Uvalde happened. Our schools let out earlier. And as this school year starts, we may have some students, staff, and parents that are questioning the safety of their schools, maybe anew or maybe for the first time. we may be working with parents who are like, it's hard to make that drop off on the first day, when we might not have thought twice about it last year. We may have kids who, question whether it's even safe to participate, in their extracurricular activities. Is it safe to go to this football game? Where is it safe to be? And so we're certainly not saying that experiencing any of these events means that our kids are automatically going to be exhibiting trauma symptoms. But we do want to normalize the idea that many of us are questioning our safety in places we once felt safe. And that's a normal response to these difficult events that we've all been experiencing. And so what we want to think about together is how that disruption to our sense of safety might impact our ability to learn, our ability to get back to the business of school, our ability to interact with our peers and those around us. So we're going to spend most of our time talking about how we support kids, but I want to spend just a few minutes kind of just reminding ourselves or refreshing ourselves about some of the ways that children can be impacted by what's happening in their own lives in terms of traumatic events or what's happening in the world around them. And mainly what we want to do is recognize that trauma can impact kids, can impact adults, can impact students, parents, and staff in many different ways. So I'm going to kind of go through this super briefly, but just reminding us that there's so many different areas of brain and body and development that can potentially be impacted when we go through these kinds of difficult things. And these are just good reminders that we want to be thoughtful when we see differences in our kids or our colleagues in some of these areas. So we know that trauma can, kind of starting at the top of that circle there, trauma can affect our ability to think. When we experience a traumatic event, it can set our nervous system on high alert, and our body and our brain are kind of being watchful for danger. And so it's hard to think about other things. It can be hard to focus, especially when we're not sure that our world is a safe place. We know that high levels of stress or experiences of trauma can impact our physical health. It can decrease our immune system. We can get sicker more easily. We might see kids experiencing more like stomach aches or headaches than they normally would. They might be eating more or less or sleeping more or less than usually do. And we know that when sleep gets disrupted, it kind of disrupts everything else, about life, it seems. Sleep is so important. Every parent knows that, I think. And when we experience trauma, the part of our brain that we need to be successful in school, for our, kind of where we do our higher order thinking and our reasoning, our focusing and our planning, our organizing, the place where we can, override our distractions so we can pay attention in class. That part of our brain isn't as fully online as we need it to be, and the emotional centers of our brain are more active. So it can be harder to focus. It can be harder to pay attention. It can be harder to be organized and all the things we need to be successful in school. And because of the emotional centers of our brain are more active, we can look more impulsive. We can have more emotional reactives that kind of seem out of proportion to what's going on. We know that high levels of stress or trauma can put a strain on relationships. It can be hard to feel safe in relationships, hard to make new relationships, hard to have trusting relationships. And then I think probably what's perhaps most intuitive to many of us is that stress and trauma can lead to mental health issues. And so we know that trauma is a risk factor for most mental health disorders, but in particularly, we think about anxiety, we think about depression, we think about post-traumatic stress disorder, all of which were kind of already up in terms of rates as we've gone through this pandemic. And then behavior. We know that we can see behavior changes in kids. Everything from, more withdrawn kind of behavior to more angry behavior. Or we might just see changes in what's going on with kids, that they're late or that they're absent, just any kinds of differences. And so I think the main point here is just that there's many parts of the body that can be impacted by the difficult events that we've been talking about. And what you see in any given child, student, colleague, or in yourself, may be different. But just kind of having this awareness will help us think about the needs of those that are around us. And then as we think about those needs, we can think about what are the strategies that any of us, any caring adult can use, strategies that it doesn't require a mental health professional necessarily, strategies that as teachers or parents you can use to support children and enhance their sense of both physical safety and emotional safety, feeling safe as they go back to school, so that they can kind of get back to that relaxed place where they can focus on learning and the goals that you have for them as educators. So one of the first strategies we think about for parents or other trusted adults when there have been these kinds of difficult events in our community that are widespread, kind of the events that we were talking about, like Uvalde and Chicago and Tulsa, and in our own community here in Little Rock with the recent shootings. We want to encourage adults to talk about it with kids. I know that sometimes our first instinct is how can we shelter our children from these things? How can we, almost hide what's happening from them? And that if we don't bring it up, maybe they somehow won't know. But even for our very young children, it's really hard to escape kind of the news world that we live in. And kids are likely to hear about these kind of events, whether it's on TV, whether it's on the internet, on social media, at school. Young kids, even in childcare, they're overhearing adults talking, where kids are speculating about what happened to one another. And so they may be hearing about it already, talking about it already, and yet much of their information may be, not be accurate. So often our best strategy is just honesty, and not trying to mislead them, for their own good, so to speak, because it tends not to be, actually. We also know that when there's these difficult things and upsetting news, kids are better able to cope with the news when they hear about it from a caring adult and when they have an understanding of what's happened, an accurate understanding of what's happened. We all need information in these situations. We seek information. We want to know what happened. And so when a major crisis occurs, it can be a good idea to bring it up with kids, even young kids. And so sometimes it's kind of hard to start those conversations, but, a good way to begin is just by asking, what they know and understand about what happened. And you can say something like, I heard about a really scary thing at a school in Texas. Have you heard about it? And then just let them, as that conversation unfolds, you can figure out what they know or understand, what they don't know, what they might misunderstand, and let their questions kind of be your guide as to how much information to provide. We know that younger children will need, briefer, simpler information along with some reassurances that there's a lot that you're doing to keep their homes and their schools safe, and that adults are there to protect them. We'll talk in a minute about some kind of key points to emphasize. We think about too, really being patient and not pushing this conversation too hard, watching for kids to just be ready for it, watching for clues that maybe they're now ready to talk, and maybe they weren't before. Maybe suddenly, they're sitting next to you on the couch and just kind of hanging around. And, especially too, I think some of our older children and teenagers may kind of give you the signals that they don't want to talk or they don't need to discuss it. Like, I'm fine, Mom. And it's not, we wouldn't say it's generally a good idea to force them to talk to you, but you just want to let them know that the door is open, and keep that door open for them to come back and discuss things later. And you're just letting them know you're available when they're ready to talk, and then they can choose that timing. And so we do want to bring it up with kids. And we also want to watch what we're saying adult to adult in front of kids. I remember when I first heard about Uvalde, I remember saying to a colleague, gosh, I'm just honestly feeling kind of hopeless about what's happening in terms of school violence right now. That was a true statement, adult to adult, not a statement I necessarily want a child in my life to overhear. And so, I always joked in my house that my daughter had bionic ears. It seemed like literally wherever I was in the house, no matter like how quiet I was whispering, it's like she had magic ears and she heard everything. And so kind of just being aware to watch what we're saying in front of kids so that we kind of don't make the situation inadvertently worse. Let's talk a little bit about developmental considerations. Obviously we're not having the same kinds of discussions with our pre-K and kindergarten kids as we are with our juniors and seniors in high school. And so just a few kinds of rules of thumb for kids at different ages. Our youngest kids, our preschoolers, our early elementary kids, are really going to need brief, simple information. Really answers to their question, and not every single fact, about a tragedy that they may have heard about. They need to know that they can ask you questions and that they can come back to you with questions, but giving them that simple overview and providing some reminders of ways in which your job as an adult is to protect them and other adults around them are working to protect them. And so you can remind them of, simple things, like the school resource officer at school that works hard to keep them safe in the hallway, and the teachers that are on the playground, when they're out there. Some simple ways of reminding them there's lots of people working to keep them safe. Of course, as you have these kind of conversations with older kids, upper elementary kids, early middle school kids, they're going to ask you harder questions probably about, am I really safe and what's being done at their school? And so it can be helpful to have, some facts, what is being done at their school? What are some of our community leaders doing to address, for example, the violence that occurred in Little Rock? And then, the older the child, they may want to focus on actions. So what is their role in maintaining a safe school? What can any of us do to contribute to being part of the solution instead of, part of the problem? And so, again, helping them remember all the things that they can do to contribute to a safe school. Maybe it's reporting strangers on a campus, reporting threats to school safety, reminding them of who is and isn't allowed to access their building. Communicating any concerns that they have to school administrators, where do they get support for emotional needs? And so kind of, think following your child's lead, giving simple answers to questions, and being ready to discuss with them their role. All of those are things that can be helpful. Just to reiterate like a few points that I think can be helpful to emphasize in some of these conversations. Even with very young children, again, we can emphasize all the ways we're working to keep them safe. The building is safe because most doors are locked except the one that we walk into. All these steps that our schools are taking. And with older children, with adolescents, and even with our colleagues and ourselves, I think it can be important to remember that, there's no absolute guarantee that something bad will never happen. It's possible, but it's also true that it's not probable. And sometimes in these times when it feels like school violence is everywhere and there's a story in the news all the time, it's helpful to remember that, yes, that it feels awful. and we should all be concerned about it. And like, I literally looked it up. There are more than 130,000 schools in the United States, and the vast majority of them were very safe last year. And so while we want to be concerned about any incident, we can remind ourselves that there's lots we're doing to stay safe, and the probability is we will stay safe. And that we all play a role in school safety. All of us can contribute to a safer school. And so we want to talk to kids about being observant, letting an adult know if they've seen something that makes them uncomfortable or nervous or frightened. We can help kids identify who's a trusted adult that you can talk to in your school and outside of your school if something makes you uncomfortable, nervous, or frightened. I think another important message is that there's a difference between gossip and tattling and reporting safety issues. And we want kids to report safety issues to prevent harm. And I found there's a team in Colorado who has an anonymous reporting system for kids, and they developed a little video that kind of talks about the difference between like tattling or gossiping and reporting safety issues. And I think it actually offers some just helpful tips for ways to emphasize that difference to kids. So we'll play that one, a part of it for you here real quick.
When something is an adult-sized problem. If things that are kid-sized problems, that's something that you can handle on your own. If you talk to an adult, it feels like tattling. Adult-sized problems are reporting. He won't give me the ball. They're not best friends anymore. She's not doing her homework. She called her hurtful names. He said he was thinking of suicide on Instagram. He has a jewel and I'm really worried. She pushed him off the swing. Even if you know the difference between tattling and reporting, it can be hard to put into practice. Our friend Dr. Matt created a list of questions to help us decide if something is tattling and is a kid-sized problem, or something is an adult-sized problem and should be reported. These questions are: 1. Does this affect the safety of me or others? 2. Is my intention to protect? 3. What is my motivation? And 4. Did the person's behavior change? Before talking to a trusted adult, first ask yourself about safety. Safety can include things such as suicide, bullying, threats, anything else that makes you or others feel unsafe, uncomfortable, should be reported. Next, ask yourself what your intention is. Is your intention to protect, or is your intention to hurt? If the answer to the first two questions is yes, then it's important to tell a trusted adult. Or, if you want to remain anonymous, or if it's after hours, you should report it to Safe to Tell. You can make a report.
Thanks, Anna Kate, for navigating us back to where we need to be. I appreciate some of the points made in that video, and think, sometimes we've been, especially if you're in a household where there's multiple kids, you maybe have drilled into kids' heads from when they were very young, like don't tattle on your brother or whatever. And so it can be really important, I think, to clarify the difference that when there's safety issues at stake, and we need to protect someone, then reporting to a safe adult is really important. Oops. Okay. Another kind of important strategy for helping kids manage through these difficult times and scary events is really just validating how they're feeling, helping them express how they're feeling to you, and kind of monitoring and keeping an eye on how they seem to be doing emotionally. One thing that I want to mention is that sometimes we don't bring up some of these difficult events to our kids because we're worried, it'll upset them. And I think sometimes kids will show they're upset. They may cry or act anxious or, cranky or irritable or otherwise show you that they're upset. But it's important to keep in mind, it's not the discussion that's making them upset. It's what happened that's making them upset. And I just, remind myself like how I felt after Uvalde, or how I felt after hearing about that supermarket in Chicago. And I was upset when I talked about it to a friend, but it wasn't my friend that was making me upset. And, it was what happened. And it felt better to talk about it. And so it really is the same with our kids. So talking about the event will let them show you, how it's impacting them, how much they're tuning into it, how much it's worrying them or stressing them. And so really the first step in coping is being able to kind of identify how they're feeling and express how they're feeling. And it's really helpful for them to know it's okay to show you when they're upset, that you can tolerate their upset and their worry. Otherwise, they may try to hide their feelings and they are left alone trying to cope with it. Some kids may have more difficult times than others communicating about what they are feeling. They might not have great words, a great emotional vocabulary for what happened. And it can be really helpful for us well before something bad has happened, just in our routine day-to-day life, to get comfortable talking about emotions, reading books about emotions, modeling expressing emotions. You as an adult modeling, expressing your feelings, just saying, I feel frustrated I spilt the milk, or disappointed that the party got canceled because of COVID, or I feel excited about seeing grandma this weekend. And we also model how to cope with feelings. We can model, I feel frustrated I spilt the milk. I'm going to take a couple of deep breaths to help me calm down before I clean it up. And working on those kind of coping strategies can be really helpful. For other kids, they'll do a great job of expressing themselves verbally. Other kids may want to express themselves in writing or in art, or physically, the dance it out kind of thing. And then, other kids are going to have a harder time talking about it or showing you, and yet you may see it. You may see changes, kind of as you monitor their emotions. You may be looking for changes in behavior, in mood, in appetite, in sleep, in physical symptoms. And so if you're seeing those kind of things after a big difficult event, in most children, as you kind of reassure them, as you work through this with them, those kind of symptoms will ease, and we'll kind of talk more in a moment about what to do if they don't. Another strategy that we suggest for parents as well as for teachers when something difficult has happened is that these kind of difficult events can throw us out of our routine. Something like Uvalde happens, you may be thinking, man, I don't know that I want to send my kid to school the next day, or there may be different reasons that you are kind of outside your routine. And so it can be really important to remember that people, all of us, kids, young and old, thrive on routine. Our routines really bring us kind of that sense of safety and security and comfort. Knowing what's going to happen next is very comforting. Teaching kids routines help them feel safe, help them relax. You may remember this, as you parented a young child, for example, and maybe you had an evening routine where, there was an evening meal, then bath and lotion and brushing teeth and, reading a book before bed and then cuddles or kisses. Having those things in the same order, helps kids really settle in and relax. We get, all of us, kind of a feeling of peace and rest and safety in doing the things that we know to do. And so if something happens that really disrupts our world, or a scary event, the comfort of routine can be helpful. And sometimes we're out of routine just just for more typical reasons, like it's been summer. Our summer routine is not the same as our back to school routine. And so getting back to routine, you know, certainly well before school starts can be helpful. And for our younger kids, sometimes visual reminders of routines can be helpful. So if you're a parent at home, you know, maybe the evening routine is shown kind of in pictures on the refrigerator. Or if you're a teacher, your visual schedule is kind of shown in pictures to help young kids remember, you know, when they come to class, what is the order of events? We come in and we hang up our backpack. We have breakfast, you know, et cetera, et cetera. And then at this point is when mom and dad, you know, or grandma or grandpa, whoever comes and picks us up, and kind of just having that sense of what's coming next and that routine can be really helpful. And then the last point I want to emphasize before turning it over to Emily is about media exposure in these times when there are things happening in our communities that are getting so much attention in the media, but can be pretty scary for kids. We know that too much exposure for any of us can lead to higher anxiety. And so it's not just kids, but for ourselves, sometimes, you know, we need to know what's happening, and then we might need to step away. We might need to limit our exposure. For very young kids, we may need to eliminate exposure. Like this may be a time when, you know, we're just watching those, you know, favorite PBS shows, you know, on the DVD or the iPad, and we're not tuning into the news at all. You know, if we're talking about older kids, it can be really helpful to be sure you're watching what they watch and providing opportunities for them to kind of debrief that with you. And so you can get a sense of their thoughts, their fears about what they're hearing, their concerns, their questions, and their point of view. So, you know, maybe it's about using the commercial break during the news to kind of digest and talk about it, and kind of get some insight into what they're thinking and feeling. And then something that I hadn't really thought about until we were doing a little bit of research about suggestions for managing media is that it can be really helpful to share positive media images, like about the helpers, about who's taking steps to help in difficult situations, and just that reminder that there are always people that, you know, we can turn to who will help us through difficult situations. And then Emily is going to talk about what happens when these kind of prevention sort of strategies just don't seem to be enough. And I know that Emily was having some technical difficulties, so before I sign off, I'm just going to make sure Emily's here.
I am here. I'm currently here. Internet is working. So for the moment, yes.
Excellent. And if you need me to do anything like move your slides, just let me know.
Okay, thank you. So what if, right? Like what if we've done all of these preparations and we've prepared for the first day, we've stuck to our routine. What if we get to that day and there's still some anxiety, it's just some stress for our students, for ourselves. You know, each year as my own child has gotten older, there's a new set of anxieties. We are in the 8th grade, and ever since kindergarten, there's a new set of anxieties each year for him as well as for me and my husband as we move forward. And we've had to make a conscious decision to take those anxieties and direct them to maybe a positive motivation to motivate us. Take those maybe what ifs and turn them into conversation of even if that happens, then this, or even if you feel this way, giving some options. So this school year might be a little tougher for some of us after the events we've all heard about and experienced over the last few months. Acknowledging, like Nikki said, that some students and maybe even school staff and those of us caregivers and parents, we might just be a little bit more anxious this year. We're struggling to let that kiddo out of our eyesight or being out of arm's reach, that we can't put our physical arms on them and touch them and hold them and keep them safe. So on this slide particular, we're talking about students. So for our students, just discussing and preparing ahead of time, that's the key. It gives time for questions to be answered or at least explored. Sometimes when kids know what to expect, it typically helps lower their anxieties. And sometimes they just need to have a talk about it, have a little time to process it and think about it. And then they might have new questions or different things that they want to explore. So these are just a few ideas to help support your students. If there has been a specific event that's happened over the summer that you know has happened to your specific student, share it with the teacher so that they're aware of it. And maybe there's any specific comforts that they have. If it is, maybe a grounding tool or so special. I know for my son, after grandpa died, he really wanted to wear grandpa's watch every day to school, and it brought him comfort, something that he could look to whenever he would think about granddad and kind of make him sad. He could look down at that watch and he would remember happy memories. So any type of object or something that might help your student, talk with the school about it, explore it with the staff, whether it's through an email or you do those parent visits beforehand. I've never had a teacher yet tell me, you tell us too much, you communicate too much, we're tired of your emails. So communicate with the teachers and the staff. Share with them what's working at home whenever your child does need a comforter or support, so that they have those tools. My bet is that they would much rather be prepared and have some comfort items and know what to do versus just being stuck in the moment and not know how to support your kiddo. For caregivers and school staff, we also need a plan. We might have some anxieties, like I mentioned, for that first day. So these are just a few ideas that you might consider for yourselves. We've had to remind ourselves of some of the same things that we have to remind our kids. Most schools are safe. These events actually are rare, and steps have been taken to keep our child and to keep our school safe. So some of the things here shared on the slide is if you have a trusted friend or colleague, so maybe it's another parent or another colleague in your school, another teacher or staff member, talk to them beforehand. Share some of your own anxieties and maybe meet up after drop off. If you're a parent, meet up after drop off in the morning and have a cup of coffee, kind of check in with each other. If you're a hugger, get a hug. If your staff, maybe meeting before school starts just to check in with each other and seeing how you're doing. Maybe bring someone a Starbucks that morning before you start school. Nobody turns down a Starbucks or a cake pop. I mean, something for each other just to get that day started. Check in with each other during the day. Like because I know at lunchtime when my kiddo starts school, all summer I'm used to getting lunch together for him and seeing what he's eating or what he needs. So at lunchtime it was a little tough for me because I was like, well, where is he? Is he eating? Does he have enough food to eat? So check in with your friends and make sure they're doing okay throughout the day. And then again, communicate your concerns with school staff prior to the first day. I think communication is so key. And then just using that helpful self-talk. Like, you know what, they've made it this far, they're gonna be okay. And you have to remind yourself the safety steps that schools are putting into place to keep you safe if you're a staff member, and also to keep our kiddos safe. There is a lot being done to keep them safe. But there still will be tough days. Maybe last year was a really tough year and you just had to get through it. We just had that countdown till the final day of school. We were just trying to get through it. So this is a time maybe to start fresh, make a new plan. What worked last year? What didn't work last year? What can we do different this year? Give each other grace for sure. Like there's going to be times that we're going to miss something. We're going to struggle. We're going to have a rough day, and just giving each other grace. And that means your colleagues as well as our kiddos in the classroom. Sometimes they're going to have some rough days. So giving grace. Asking for help and sharing the load. You are not in this together. You know, we've all heard the slogan or the statement that it takes a village to raise a kid. So let's do this together. Ask for help, whether that's from another parent or whether that's from a colleague within your school. If you're struggling with an area, ask for help. Let's share the load, even if it's just having a moment of a meltdown, so that they know that they can go buy you another Starbucks or get that cake pop that you need. But be sure that you're sharing the load with the people around you. And I'm sticking to cups here, but find time to refill your cup. Do something for yourself, and maybe together that's going to help refill your cup. I had a car once that had a check engine light come on. Well, that is the light. If that comes on in your car, you kind of panic because engine's kind of important. Like it's like the heart and soul of your car. So I'm thinking I'm going to break down at some point. And I immediately, I mean, if it would have been the windshield wiper light or the check check your fluids light. I probably would have just kept going and not checked it. But when that check engine light came on, it quickly got my attention and quickly got me to the service center. Now, I got it to the service center and they plugged it up to the computer and they said, oh yeah, we need to refill your windshield wiper fluid. I was like, really? Check engine light made me a little more panicked, and it's just the windshield wiper fluid. And I'll never forget, the guy looked at me and said, but it got your attention, didn't it? You didn't ignore that light. I said, well, you're right. So let's not ignore ourselves. Let's not ignore even the little things. Like every little piece is important to take care of ourselves and take care of each other. Sometimes when we think of self-care, some of us may think of alone time or adult time, going out to dinner with a friend, or let's be honest, there's sometimes we just sit in the car for a minute, enjoy some quiet before we go into the house and take on the next part of our day. And that can be part of it. That's certainly important to take care of ourselves individually. But it's also about integrating things that help our body and mind into our daily routines. And sometimes that can mean doing it with our kids, doing activities in the classroom. If we're sitting at our desk and we're getting kind of stiff or tired of sitting in the chair, don't you think their little bodies are getting tired too? Maybe we get up, do some stretches, dance it out, as Nikki mentioned. That's one of my favorite things to do, to turn on some music and just kind of wiggle and get all the moves out. And I've seen all ages do it. I've visited lots of schools, from the kindergartners all the way to the high school kids. Now, some of them are a little slow to get up, but don't let them tease you. They enjoy getting up and moving a little bit. But it helps both the adult bodies as well as the child. And it's a great way for us to role model wellness for kids, to show them when you're feeling stiff or tired or you're struggling, let's just go for a walk. Let's go and explore the outside and see what's going on. And it can even help build our relationships. It can give us time to talk about things, to spend time together, and just be able to say, hey, this is tough, but we're going to get through this together. And help your family maintain that balance between work and play. All of us need balance between work and play. So for us as adults, maybe it's a certain time of day, we put down our phones, we don't answer any more emails, we just focus on spending time with our family and doing things together. If you're struggling to come up with ideas to refill your cup, here's a great drawing that I found of just a variety of things. And remember, what works for one person might not work for another. I could just, I could sit on the beach and watch the waves for hours, literally just sit there and watching the water and watching the waves. Unfortunately for my husband and my son, that is not their way to self-care. So they want to be active. They want to be physically moving and doing something. They want to be physically moving their body. So acknowledging that we might all need something different, and that's okay. Remembering what fills your cup might not fill the cup for your student or for your child. And let them explore. Find what works for them. Encourage them to explore and find things. And what works on one day might not work on a different day. So maybe we need a variety of activities to try for refilling our cup and refreshing our bodies. For many children, when they're surrounded by caring adults who are equipped with a trauma lens, that's going to be enough, and they'll recover after a difficult event with just those natural supports and those people around them. But however, some children may need professional help. Sometimes it may be obvious that a child or even an adult, maybe a parent or one of our school staff members, they might need to be referred for trauma treatment or an assessment for possible mental health services. And other times it might not be so obvious. So let's talk for just a moment about what might be some of the questions that we might ask ourselves to lead us towards whether we need to take the next step and get maybe some professional support, or whether just using those self-care techniques would be enough. Some of the red flags that we think about for our school-age children, now certainly these may be a little bit different depending on the age and the development of the child, But some of the things we see here are like persistent anxiety, depression, loss of interest. There's things that they used to enjoy, but now they just can't enjoy it anymore. They become aggressive. You see behavior changes in them, and that could be that their behavior has become more outward expression, or maybe they are isolating more. So when we think about these changes, we want to think of both ends of the spectrum. Same for sleeping and eating. Are they sleeping a lot more than what's healthy? Are they sleeping a lot less? Are they really struggling to get to sleep, stay asleep? Has their eating changed to the point that we're concerned? Maybe they're eating way too much and they're using that as a coping mechanism. Or are they eating a lot less? Academic changes, body complaints. Now, we want to notice that changes is the key feature here. Something is different than it was before, and it's lasting longer than just a couple of weeks, because we know kids, when they are growing and they're going through changes, several of these things may happen. But if we see that it's happening and it's lasting longer, and if in your gut you're feeling something's going on and you're concerned, let's take the next step. Let's check into some things. These are some questions you might ask yourself. Are these symptoms, or are those things we just talked about, are they excessive? Or are they causing impairment? Is it preventing them from being with their friends? Is it preventing them from experiencing joy? Is this lasted more than just a couple of weeks? Because as school starts and they're getting used to a new schedule, a new group of people, maybe even new foods that they have or don't have at school, they might have an adjustment period. But over several weeks, if you still are seeing these concerns consistently, you might need to look at a referral to mental health to just assess, right? Just assess. Let's just check and see. There are evidence-based trauma-focused treatments. Those are big words, but we want you to know that a mental health professional trained in trauma, they should be able to help you determine. So if you need to get that assessment, they will ask all of the questions, and we may spend a couple of visits asking lots of questions, but we want to help assess and to decide whether maybe further help is needed. The mental health referral process can be bottlenecked at times due to high needs, and we have certainly seen that, especially with our youth over the last year or so. But UAMS, we have partnered with a great service called AR Connect now, and what we have learned, what we have partnered with is, and been excited about, is that once that referral, once the family, once the legal guardian makes that first phone call, they actually are going to be connected with a mental health professional within 24 to 48 hours. So we know, when I was talking about things being bottlenecked, it could take several weeks to get a kid to see a therapist. But through AR Connect now, you're able to have access to a therapist within 24 to 48 hours. They help from ages 4 all the way up to 144, so all ages. So we're thinking about caregivers, parents, teachers, school staff, anyone is struggling. No insurance is required. Everything is free, so there's no question there. So this may be a great resource for you and for your school, for your colleagues. They have lots of ways that you can contact. They share lots of great resources. Last year, they did a great support group for teachers that was virtual. So certainly check them out to see what type of resources they might also be available to you. Our team at Arbest, as we mentioned in the beginning, who Tris works with, we have trained hundreds and hundreds of therapists all over the state in evidence-based treatment for trauma. And those treatments, they can support children ages 0 to 18. So if you wanted to go to our website, we actually have a list of all of those therapists that we have trained throughout our time as a program. So certainly that is available for you to look up a therapist, and you'd be able to contact them yourself if that is also the route that you would like to go. Tris, as we mentioned in the beginning, we just completed our first year, going into our second year. Please check out our website, our Facebook page, email us here if you have any questions or concerns. We'd love to be able to come to your school, support your school. You can also go there and learn more about what resources we can offer to schools. I always love to mention that everything we offer is free. Everybody, the principals and administrators, love to hear that part. So we are here to help you and support you. And I'll turn it back over to Anna Kate.
All right. Well, thank you, Nikki and Emily. That was a really wonderful webinar. I'm going to leave this slide up, which has our webinar code, and just jot that down, and I will be sending you an email about that for the participants. But we haven't had any questions come through yet. Or would anybody like to ask any questions? Please type those in. We'll wait a few minutes here to give you a moment to put that in. And just note that the slides from the PowerPoint are actually a handout here in this GoToWebinar program, but I'll also be emailing them out to everybody. So, well, we haven't got any questions yet, but we've had a few comments that the webinar was amazing. So good job, Nikki and Emily. We're glad that we can, provide this kind of helpful information so that we can support our students and also our staff in these difficult times. Any other questions?
Thanks for hosting us, Anna Kate, and to both you and Emily for struggling through the technology and getting it working just in time.
Yes, we made it work. And just to let everybody know that we will have another webinar next month, so stay tuned for that. And please feel free to reach out to Arbest or to Tris so that if there's any information that your schools or you might need as a parent, we would love to be able to provide that for you. So, all right, well, with that, I guess that will be the end of our webinar. Thank you everybody for attending, and we hope to see you next time.